In late 2054, the apocalypse erupted, destroying the city. The world desperately needed a hero to step up, to crush the tyranny, and that hero is our protagonist Luo Fu, who has always been regarded as a worthless piece of trash enduring countless insults from others. But it seems some nameless god must have heard his plea. Just when he thought his life was doomed to eternal failure, it unexpectedly took a turn. A sudden twist of fate in an instant. Will this newfound power help Luo Fu overcome hardships and trials he will wield? How to save this world drowning in misery. Countless sudden battles and cunning schemes await him. Dirty plots lie in wait for him. Many mysteries are slowly being revealed, a storm of fire. And bullets raged violently, sweeping through and shattering everything into pieces mixed with the remnants of flashing gunfire. The roaring flashes surged into small beams that illuminated the sky. A beautiful girl appeared, but her somber face seemed to hold a deep loneliness and desolation. She faintly appeared before his eyes like a fleeting dream, and offered a faint smile. Her bare body was covered in deep, bloody cuts, which strangely blended with the desolate scenery of this eerie wasteland. That small yet resilient figure then turned and vanished as quickly as sea foam. The battlefield was seething with torrents of bewitching spiritual energy that rushed to form thick, dense layers. It roared fiercely without rest, spewing out terrifying crimson auras that blocked all life in this place. From within the layers of spiritual energy flashing like high-voltage electricity, she vanished as quickly as a dream. Despite the dangers lurking everywhere, in the end, only a brilliant beam of light remained, rumbling loudly. It struck down repeatedly like lightning, shattering the treacherous sky, convulsing continuously and swirling violently into an indescribably dazzling radiance. Whack! Thanks to a direct hit from the teacher's projectile. Luo Fu returned to the real world, his mind clearing up as he escaped from that unfinished dream. Facing the teacher's scolding for his lack of seriousness in class, his surrounding classmates took the opportunity to relentlessly tease and mock him. Waves of jeering laughter rose one after another without stopping, making Luo Fu cringe. He could only silently lower his head and endure it, his whole body starting to tremble with each wave of cruel mockery from those so-called friends. Luo Fu just sat there on his chair, enduring the humiliation, even as his soul was being torn apart by their vicious words, completely unaware that he was about to become the target of a mysterious, unnamed force. Finally, when school ended, his classmates scorned Luo Fu as nothing but a loser. Nothing more and nothing less, so they didn't even bother to get near him, wishing they could avoid him as much as possible out of fear. They were afraid of the uselessness he represented. He had grown so used to hearing such words that by now he didn't even bother to fight back anymore, just treating it like wind passing by his ears. He focused seriously on reading the news on his phone. The news was about a mysterious event in the world that occurred on West Capital's Cloud-Top Mountain Island, turning all humans into monsters, and it was becoming more sensational than ever. This made Luo Fu unable to stop thinking about the possibility of the world falling into an apocalypse. He secretly felt that if he had followed through that day, surely no one would ever be able to ridicule him again. Lost in a stream of wandering, sorrowful thoughts, his beautiful childhood friend Diepduknya appeared in his mind. Her voice was filled with concern for his reckless and undisciplined lifestyle. This meek acceptance of his situation made her sigh in exasperation, forcing her to let it go once more as he remembered. Since losing his memories 3 years ago, Diepduknya had been the only one at school who consistently looked after him. She was young but nagged like an old woman, constantly pestering Luo Fu to spend less time on his phone. She urged him to engage with the real world and live a more positive, optimistic life, making him break out in a nervous sweat with a hint of bitterness. He felt as if he couldn't find any common ground for conversation with others, which only made her exhale in frustration. Realizing this was true, she said in a gentle, calm voice that it was all right and she would help him. This made Luo Fu ecstatic, as if he had been waiting for this very moment, and he snatched his lunchbox and bolted in a flash. He ran off, ignoring the sound of her shouts that echoed continuously behind him. He ran up to the school rooftop, that familiar feeling of loneliness enveloping him, as always, simply wanting to escape. He needed to get away from Diepduknya, whose nagging had become so frequent lately it gave him a headache. While Luo Fu was enjoying a precious moment of tranquility, a menacing figure with a threatening voice appeared. It flashed before his eyes, successfully pulling him out of the screen that contained the virtual world he was so deeply immersed in. The group of guys seemed to be the school's delinquents, with cigarettes hanging from their mouths as they puffed out smoke. They surrounded him, backing him into a corner each with a sly grin as they ordered Luo Fu to quickly call for someone. They wanted him to call Deep Duk Nya over their words laced with a disgusting subtext that he found unbearable. Seeing them cackle amongst themselves with such repulsive expressions, he mustered what little courage he had and firmly refused them. The leader of the gang, infuriated by his unexpected defiance, quietly gritted his teeth in anger and gestured to his crew. His lackeys then proceeded to beat him to a pulp in that deserted, desolate spot, kicking Luo Fu until he was flat on the ground. His body felt as limp as a rag doll as he let them freely stomp on him with continuous brutal force. The relentless assault, paired with their vulgar taunts, left him no choice but to grit his teeth and bitterly endure the pain. Seeing him go limp without a shred of resistance only fueled their frenzy, and they continued to beat him relentlessly. Truly, the most terrifying thing in the world is the darkness in people's hearts, and they acted like bloodthirsty, inhuman demons. Seeing him in too much pain to even make a sound, one of them slapped him so hard his vision blurred, and he grew dizzy. Blood poured from his mouth and nose, and Luo Fu couldn't help but feel a bewildered, cynical laugh bubble up about the whole realistic life philosophy. That positive everyday life Deep Duk Nya had preached about seemed like a joke, now his face darkening as a deep-seated hatred began to stir. It manifested inside his body, growing larger and more uncontrollable by the second, like the final straw that breaks the camel's back. In that most unexpected moment, it erupted with ferocious power, his heart pounding and blood roaring in his veins. His limbs suddenly began to convulse, thrashing wildly with his chaotic thoughts until in a moment of uncontrollable rage, as if possessed by a demonic entity guided by his own raw instinct, Leo immediately charged straight at Dylan, who was kicking relentlessly, and with the explosive force of a motor shattered the railing, sending them both into a freefall, their descent accompanied by Dylan's terrified screams as they plummeted from the rooftop, straight down towards the city below. Then something completely unforeseen suddenly appeared before their bewildered eyes. A long serpentine tentacle with bizarre, colorful patterns materialized out of thin air. It appeared from nowhere, coiling tightly around Dylan's body, and in a split second crushed him instantly. His body was torn to shreds, a grotesque mix of blood and gore splattering everywhere before Leo's horrified eyes. In an instant, Dylan was reduced to a mangled pulp from the ground below in a terrifying surge. More and more tentacles erupted, bursting violently from the earth and spreading out in ever-increasing numbers. With their immense power, Dylan's lackeys couldn't escape either, suffering the same gruesome fate. Like the branches of a monstrous tree, they relentlessly crushed their prey. Amidst the chaos, a figure flickered past Leo's vision just as he slammed into the ground with a painful thud, his landing anything but graceful. He barely opened his eyes to see Celia's cold, stoic face staring down at him, which made Leo wonder why she was here at a time like this. Celia's silhouette appeared before him, like an ethereal, almost unreal dream, forcing him to question why she was here in the middle of this chaotic outbreak. Before he could finish his sentence, the writhing tentacles continued their relentless rampage. They burst violently through the earth and stone, emerging in a massive horde with an overwhelming power, prompting Celia to immediately grab his hand and pull him from the chaotic ruins, running as fast as they could. As they fled the horrific scene, they witnessed their classmates being brutally ensnared by those hard stone-like tendrils, wrapped up and left dangling like strange fruit on a tree. Fresh blood dripped onto the ground, mixing with horrific screams and cries to create a truly brutal spectacle. Leo's face went pale, sweat pouring down like rain as he struggled to believe the apocalypse had truly arrived. Everything was happening in a blur. The situation back at the school was no better, as those long, stone-hard tentacles had already infiltrated and overrun every corner of the campus, transforming it into a dark, damp ruin that made hell on earth seem merciful in comparison. The students captured by the creatures were slowly beginning to mutate. Their bodies twisted and transformed, showing extremely disturbing signs of a horrific change from within the tangled web of roots that resembled a maze. Countless soulless bodies were transforming into bloodthirsty zombies, letting out ferocious roars. Their blood-red eyes glowed from within mangled faces, drooling with an insatiable hunger for human flesh as they violently surged forward. Unleashing their feral nature, saliva dripped endlessly as the horde of mutants loomed forward. They swarmed towards Luo Fu and Ye Denya, growing larger and larger until he was completely panicked just as he could only brace himself. To fight back, Ye Denya had somehow already pulled a gun from her person. Quick as a flash, she raised it and pulled the trigger, creating a deafeningly loud and violent explosion. Luo Fu trembled as he looked at the smoking gun in her hand, feeling a bit terrified. He couldn't imagine she had the courage to do something so dangerous. Facing the relentless assault from the horde, Ye Denya didn't hesitate for a single moment. The gun did its job as she continued to fire round after round with booming shots and billowing smoke filling the air. Luo Fu suddenly recalled the incident from 3 years ago after his accident and subsequent temporary amnesia. She had always told him that she was his childhood sweetheart, but comparing that to her current fierce demeanor, ruthlessly gunning down the zombies as blood splattered everywhere. It streamed down her cold, emotionless face, now a stark contrast to the sweet and gentle girl from his memories no matter how he looked at it. Her aura, her clothes, everything made Luo Fu terrified. He felt like he was looking at two completely different people. The thought alone was horrifying. Despite Ye Dana's good intentions of trying to pull him away from this place, Luo Fu slowly backed away. Full of suspicion, he wanted to know who she was, why she was nothing like the Ye Dana he knew, but the current crisis was too dire. It left her no time to explain. She shot him a sharp look and grabbed his hand to run away from the blood-red eyes of the monsters that stared with ravenous hunger from behind the writhing tentacles. The two continued their desperate escape through the desolate, ruined cityscape. Everywhere fires blazed and thick smoke billowed from collapsing ruins under a pitch-black sky, causing Luo Fu to fall deep into thought. He still couldn't understand what in the world was happening. Ye Dana felt that this was the moment. It was a good opportunity to reveal everything. She decided she couldn't hide the truth from him any longer, and as she opened her mouth to tell him everything, swoosh! The tentacles took advantage of their momentary distraction, viciously lunging with spear-like roots aimed right at her. Her eyes widened as she glanced over. Seeing the swift attack, she immediately used all her strength to shove him aside. A sound rang out, and the one thing no one ever wanted to see happened in the most unexpected way. Luo Fu dazedly opened his eyes only to be met with the sight of Ye Dana's lifeless body, her eyes staring blankly at him. Her pupils were already still as fresh blood gushed uncontrollably from the gaping hole in her stomach. Her body dangled limply from the root, leaving Luo Fu to do nothing but scream her name in endless agony. He panicked. His eyes filled with tears as he tightly hugged Ye Dana's motionless body, calling her name over and over in despair. In anguish, Ye Dana's whole body began to tremble in Luo Fu's arms. She shakily reached out to hold his hands, which were already infected by the deadly toxin. A network of dark purple veins began to appear on her skin, and her eyes turned a terrifying blood red. Panicked, she realized she was infected with the horrific poison and urgently told him to run away from there immediately, before it was too late. Behind her, the tangled mass of roots had absorbed the nutrients from countless innocent victims and had become more powerful and engorged than ever before. Its entire body pulsed with a sinister aura, as if it could rise up and devour everything at any moment. All Luo Fu could do was scream desperately, not wanting to leave her behind alone, reaching out to pull her away, but it was too late. There wasn't much time left. Dichduknya hurriedly shoved him away, even though her own heart was in extreme agony. Unrelenting at that very moment, the mutants swarmed out from the writhing mass of tentacles like beasts that had already marked their prey. As they lunged at her, tearing relentlessly, fresh blood gushed from her arms and abdomen, soaking her completely. The pain was indescribable, and blood began to pour unceasingly from her mouth. Luo Fu was terrified to his very core. The horrific sight of the woman he loved being torn apart like cold cuts before his eyes was truly beyond his endurance. It felt as if his entire world had crumbled in a single helpless moment, leaving him with no choice but to powerlessly watch her slowly die before him. Seeing Luo Fu just sitting there stunned and dazed, Dichduknya grew frantic. Her mangled body was already surrounded by the bloodthirsty horde, but her concern for him had never wavered from the past until now it remained unchanged. She immediately shouted, ordering him to run away quickly, hearing her desperate cry. His mind snapped out of its stupor, his cloudy bloodshot eyes widened in shock, dilating with each passing moment. Overwhelmed from deep within his mind, the shout, "Run!" echoed slowly, resurfacing from a stream of distant, hazy memories that he couldn't recall clearly. It once again buried itself deep inside, making his head feel like it was about to explode and shatter. It all brought him back to his dark and painful past. Dimly, a scene appeared before his eyes, a somewhat familiar sight. It was his father being attacked by a swarm of monstrous beasts, his deep, warm voice lovingly telling him to escape quickly from within the cold, hard earth. No one knew what he had been through. A small body buried in the cold had miraculously managed to hold on to a few faint, tragic breaths. According to the doctors who saved Luo Fu, his body had apparently been invaded by the origin seed, which had formed a symbiotic bond with him, becoming one with it. there was no way to remove it, and he himself had already lost his memories. Thus, he was considered the first test subject for this ironic case, a wait-and-see experiment to observe how things would develop after 3 years when he matured, just as he lay unresponsive, bandaged up. In a hospital bed, a mysterious woman brought a still young Dik Duk Nya to appear before him, claiming she was Lok Fu's childhood sweetheart. Lok Fu vaguely stared at the unfamiliar scene before him, his mind a blank slate. He gazed intently at the two complete strangers before him who were called his parents. With some suspicion, he seemed to feel that something was wrong, but his memory at the time was insufficient to realize what was amiss. Returning to the present, Lok Fu's vision blurred as tears streamed down his face, gradually recalling the painful memories of his past. He couldn't control his emotions as the 3 great sorrows piled on, returning. All at once, by now, Dik Duk Nya's entire body had been almost completely ravaged by the bloodthirsty horde, leaving only tattered patches of flesh and stumps reaching up to her shoulders. But Lok Fu still refused to give up. He never wanted to run away and survive alone. On his tear-streaked, anguish-filled face, a few sparks of courage seemed to ignite as he instantly braced himself and charging straight into the violent horde of monsters. This insane act of his left Dik Duk Nya completely stunned. All that remained of her was a cold and broken body. Yet, feeling a slight touch of emotion, she tried to muster her last ounce of strength and let out a faint groan, telling him to run away quickly. Her entire body was now completely swarmed by the ferocious zombie horde like hungry leeches. There wasn't a single gap. Lok Fu watched in agony as her figure before his eyes gradually faded and crumbled, no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't grasp her cold and tattered hands. It shattered his heart with a sorrow so deep it was numbing. Just like that, her entire body slowly vanished beneath the dense and deadly crimson roots. For a long moment it seemed that Dik Duk Nya was fated to die with no hope left, but then, from within the pitch-black void, Lok Fu powerfully broke through everything and seized her small, weak hands. A surge of overwhelming emotion successfully awakened her from her brief stupor. It was like a glimmer of light in the final moment that suddenly erupted in the middle of the suffocatingly dark night. As for Dik Duk Nya, her entire being was shrouded in a dark and deathly aura as she slowly turned to him. Her expression was on full alert, which made Lok Fu slightly unnerved, and he hastily explained that he had simply pulled her out of the monster horde. He insisted he truly didn't know what had happened. Right now, she was his #1 suspect because after all the terrible things that had occurred, Lok Fu felt there was no way she could remain so calm. He immediately switched to a defensive stance and stared intently at her with cold, wary eyes. He quietly asked who she really was. Suddenly, Dik Duk Nya, instead of answering, moved with lightning speed. Her hand formed a fist and shattered the body of a zombie that had been stalking them to devour her whole. She one-shotted as easily as breathing with a level of earth-shattering power that made him break out in a cold sweat. After a moment of a battle, she decided to reveal the truth. She was a member of the Wei Lan Guard Squad belonging to Unit 7. In the afternoon light, her eyes suddenly sparkled with an indescribable brilliance, leaving Lok Fu so stunned he couldn't close his mouth. According to Dik Duk Nya, Wei Lan Science and Technology is the largest financial conglomerate in the country, possessing world-leading technology. 3 years ago, an incident occurred at Wei Lan's deep-sea research base, and Lok Fu was the sole survivor. She had followed the clues to find him and had been secretly watching over his life ever since. Lok Fu trembled, his hands clenched into fists, realizing that his amnesia wasn't from a traffic accident. He suddenly roared, demanding that she tell him the truth of the matter immediately. What in the world happened at that deep-sea research base? However, the current situation didn't allow enough time for her to answer his million why questions, because the tentacle-like roots and the horde of zombies had evolved to a new level of savage ferocity. Roaring with immense power, Dik Duk Nya quickly grabbed his hand and pulled him into a run. She explained that her mission was limited to protecting him. If he had more questions, he could wait until after. They returned to headquarters and asked the higher-ups. The terrifying zombie horde with skin as hard as iron swarmed after them in relentless waves. The moment the monsters rounded the corner, they found that Lok Fu and Dik Duk Nya had vanished. But both of them were one step ahead of the horde, successfully diving into a manhole right beneath their feet. Inside the dark and foul-smelling sewer, they had a heart-stoppingly close call, narrowly escaping the Grim Reaper's scythe. He caught a glimpse of her body exposed beneath her clothes, which had been torn to shreds by the horde, and he suddenly became flustered. His face turned beet red as he quickly draped his jacket over her. Then he hesitantly cleared his throat, saying he needed to know the truth of the situation. But first, he had to confirm his parents' safety. Hearing this, Dishtuknya quietly agreed. She then pulled the jacket's hood over her head and headed straight for his house. Luo Fu felt that even though she was a complete stranger, she had risked her life to protect him, so for now, he could only choose to trust her as he followed her lead. They slowly entered the apartment complex where the hallways were littered with corpses, adding to the bleak and desolate atmosphere. The devastation made Luo Fu unable to stop himself from asking who created these monsters. Dishtuknya remained silent. Instead, she just walked straight ahead and opened the door to his apartment. The pitch-black interior sent his mind into a state of chaos. As he called out for his mother, something suddenly struck the back of his neck, causing him to collapse in an instant, much to Dishtuknya's surprise. A woman wielding a stun gun aggressively broke the deathly silence that had filled the space. Seeing Luo Fu struck down, Dishtuknya lunged at the woman in front of her without a shred of hesitation. Her body entered an agitated state, instantly activating her power as coarse red spikes erupted all over her skin. She then ferociously charged forward with an immense and unrelenting force, clashing violently with the unknown woman. For a long while they grappled fiercely, their power and ferocity evenly matched in a relentless struggle as a wave of powerful energy surged from their clash. Dazed, Luo Fu managed to flip the light switch, and the blinding light clearly revealed the face of the woman fighting so intensely. It was his own mother. He immediately screamed for Dishtuknya to stop her attack at once. Thanks to his cry, the fight came to an end. Only then did his mother chuckle and put the stun gun away, explaining that she thought a monster had broken into the house. Seeing Dishtuknya's strange spiky appearance left his mother a bit confused, so the girl quietly explained what happened. She revealed that she had been bitten, but Luo Fu had managed to save her just in time. The mention of his name reminded his mother of the poor guy. She had just zapped into unconsciousness. She quickly hurried over to help him up. He was left speechless by his mother's shocking strength. Something felt very wrong. Why was his mom carrying a stun gun? Furthermore, when she fought with Dishtuknya, she was able to completely hold her own, not losing an inch of ground. Hearing his questions, she just laughed and said it was all to protect him. As the two were sharing a touching mother-son moment, a staggering figure appeared. Swaying from side to side, it approached from behind them. It was Luo Fu's father. His gaunt body looked utterly exhausted, unable to even walk properly, and his horribly mutated arm was visible from beneath a white bandage. The sight made Luo Fu desperately worried. His mother explained that after the apocalypse began, there was no phone signal, so she couldn't get in contact with him. She decided to go to his school to find him, but she was only halfway there when she was ambushed by a horde of monsters. Her face turned pale as she recounted the story, and she hugged her ailing husband tightly in her arms. Learning that his father had ended up this way solely to save her, Luo Fu felt that if he could save Ye Denya, then there was no reason he couldn't save his own father. He gently placed him on the bed, deciding to risk it all. Before the expectant eyes of everyone around, he gently touched his father's festering and deformed hands. A stream of aura then gently emerged, spreading throughout his body with every movement of his hand. It gradually began to shine brilliantly, illuminating a large area. Fortunately, the festering arm was finally healed, making everyone sigh in relief. But he still felt that the sensation this time wasn't quite the same as it was with Ye Denya. He realized that back then she had seemed to actively accept his power, whereas inside his father's body there seemed to be something else. Something that was agitated and frantically trying to escape. His mother gently helped his father sit up on the bed. When the man heard that Luo Fu could heal him, he was extremely surprised, turning to pat his son's shoulder in praise. But what caught Luo Fu's eye were the cracked veins crawling and spreading all over his father's neck. The speed at which they spread across his flesh grew faster, leaving everyone utterly speechless as they slowly backed away in extreme fear. As for the father himself, he still couldn't figure out what on earth was happening. He clearly still felt extremely relieved, and his whole body was brimming with power. Suddenly, something erupted from within his body. All sorts of disgusting, thorny tentacles spewed out, causing both Luo Fu and his mother to freeze in terror. She frantically yelled for him to do something quickly, but it was too late. It seemed the consciousness of the thing inside his father had just been awakened by him. Ye Denya quickly channeled her power to restrain the creature, but his tearful mother loudly stopped her. She still clung to a painful sliver of hope, wanting to try just one more time, but it was already too late. The mass of violent thorny roots burst from his abdomen, sprouting and branching out, multiplying rapidly and growing denser by the second. It caused him so much pain he was rendered speechless, using his last bit of strength to grimace and urge everyone to run. Remembering not long ago, it all felt like a relentless nightmare to Luo Fu. The scene from the surprise birthday party that his parents and Ye Denya had secretly organized for his 18th birthday. Those warm, happy memories with his loved ones felt like just yesterday, the happiest moments of his entire life. The old joyful family photograph with all the familiar and beloved faces of his loved ones. Now it could no longer be returned to, as if it were the karma of time's cycle vanishing without a trace. Luo Fu watched in agony as Ye Denya was brutally struck, collapsing, covered in blood against the wall. The powerful force churning with the thick smoke and dust turned everything into a chaotic and tragic ruin. His mother trembled, crying hysterically before her husband's body, which had been completely consumed and was now sprouting countless gruesome branches. Just then, the horde of thorny tentacles relentlessly continued to use their sharp spines to snatch his mother. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fu desperately pulled her hand, trying to save her, but his efforts seemed futile. His father wept, tears streaming down his weathered face, soaking it completely. Was there any way to suppress the terrifying power of the parasite inside him before the very end? His mother gently pried his tightly clenched fists open and tremblingly told him to quickly take Dichtuknya and go. In a flash, she was swept away and devoured by the chaos swarm right before Lok Fu's stunned and grief-stricken eyes. He watched his mother die instantly before him, unable to do anything but scream in despair. A door creaked open, letting in a sliver of light that illuminated the splattered pieces of flesh and blood on the floor. Just as his mother was about to be torn apart by those tentacles, Lok Fu suddenly lunged forward with a sharp knife. He slashed it sideways, shattering the vicious appendages and powerfully saving his mother in the nick of time. Lok Fu roared, realizing that running away now would have been truly useless. A fierce light ignited in his eyes, which now held a powerful aura as he helped his mother outside in the perilous situation. Lok Fu clearly noticed that these tentacles had many opportunities to kill him directly. But they never took them, and though he didn't know why, it seemed he could use this to fight back. Whoosh! Before Lok Fu could even think it through, that razor-sharp tentacle had already rushed from behind and stabbed straight through his stomach so suddenly he couldn't react. Fresh blood gushed out like a fountain as he trembled, trying to drag himself toward the knife he had just dropped, but the creature seemed to read his mind and immediately struck with its tentacle. The large and powerful appendage brutally swatted the knife away, leaving Lok Fu to do nothing but curl up and endure the pain. Overcome with sorrow for her son, his mother immediately screamed, begging him to run away. Her own body could no longer move as her limbs were constricted tightly. Lok Fu roared fiercely, his eyes welling with tears, refusing to give up because they were his only beloved family. Though unable to move, his parents were deeply touched by his words and tears streamed down their faces. They decided to reveal one final truth to him, as his mother explained that they were not his biological parents. They had been merely entrusted by the Yui Lam Corporation to care for and protect him as he grew up. Every word pierced Lok Fu's heart like a poisoned dagger, making it impossible for him to accept. He was left stunned and strengthless, filled with remorse and grief as his mother offered a pale, heartbreaking smile. She softly told him that he must continue to live, her tear-filled eyes sparkling for a final moment. Then she was agonizingly crushed and devoured by the tentacles. Lok Fu's face turned deathly pale at the horrific scene as a flash of blue light burst violently from the tangled mass of monsters. A flood of happy memories rushed into his mind like a slow-motion film, with every moment feeling like it was just yesterday. The memories overwhelmed him as if trying to erase the painful present, and at that moment, Lok Fu's father's body suddenly exploded. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere as he began the process of mutation with a terrifying and overwhelming boom. Horrified by the damning sound ringing in his ears, what stood before Lok Fu were no longer his parents, but a single entity. It was a monster with terrifying tentacles writhing and squirming from a cocoon of opaque white webbing. The webbing greedily surrounded its prey, his mother, who had long since become a soulless pale corpse, as both were in the final stages of their mutation. Their bloodshot red eyes flashed brightly amidst a mass of colorful tentacles that served as the creature's brain. It delicately controlled and enveloped every single move of the two bodies that had lost all human traits as every line of memory. from the past grew more distant and faded until when they looked up, Luo Fu's loving parents had now transformed into two bloodthirsty monsters that had lost all reason, roaring as they violently swung a swirling vortex of powerful tentacles. From within their bodies toward Dishnuoknya, she tensed her entire body, which now seemed to be imprisoned by her memories. Old memories of happy, joyful scenes beside Luo Fu, the moments they had together, quietly resurfaced with overwhelming force. In this life-or-death moment, one of the tentacles had already stiffened and brutally gripped her dry throat. This caused Dishnuoknya to violently cough up blood as her entire body slammed into the wall behind her in agony, while the two monsters slowly began to crawl. Preparing to dispose of her, an ominous aura surrounded them, making the current scene look utterly terrifying seeing her struggle. Unable to fight back any longer against the relentless barrage of attacks, Luo Fu hastily charged in, trying to use his strength to push away the sharp spikes, searching for an escape route in the void. Although he was just an ordinary person with no special powers, but at the very moment Dishnuoknya was about to be struck by a devastating stab. From those sharp fragments, Luo Fu noticed on his father's mutated body, which was riddled with green veins. A blood-red, bruised, parasitic organ faintly appeared on his neck, the place where all its spiritual energy had originated from the beginning. He gritted his teeth, trembling violently as the image of his beloved family blurred once more, causing him indescribable pain. But in this situation, Luo Fu had no other choice. He immediately tensed his body and gathered all his strength, his eyes filled with unbridled resentment and sorrow as he stabbed straight into his father's neck. Blood gushed out in waves, and his parents gradually collapsed. Amidst streams of ethereal light, they looked at him gently with affectionate eyes for the last time, then, trembling, they softly told him to go quickly to the Wei Lam Corporation and make a choice. At this point, neither of them had any strength left to fight, and passed away in desolate sorrow. Their bodies flashed with a golden aura as if to light the way for Luo Fu, who was dead inside. At this moment, his eyes widened in fury, his whole body growled as he gritted his teeth, and then he went on a rampage. Like a wild beast, he attacked the surrounding monsters, relentlessly giving them no time to react before they were struck down, dying and falling like harvested wheat. Just as Dishnuoknya landed after a flurry of gunfire, a terrified scream was heard. Risa's scream drew her attention. It turned out there was still one ferocious mutated monster left, which was now rushing toward the little girl. At an incredible speed, just in time Luo Fu arrived and heroically saved her from a devastating blow. With his own immense power, his handsome face appeared full of heroic spirit under the sun, making Risa feel a bit flustered and dazed. She softly stammered her thanks to him. He then revealed that he had known of her since before, because Risa had long been famous as the pure goddess of the foreign language department, stealing the hearts of countless guys. His compliment made her feel a bit awkward and guilty because she couldn't remember who he was at all. He scratched his head and gave a sheepish laugh, but inside his heart shattered, knowing his crush didn't even know his name. He was just some nobody to her. How pathetic. But wait. It seemed Risa had heard his name somewhere before. If she remembered correctly, he was the useless childhood friend of Dishnuoknya. Her dazed expression left him speechless. Well, at least he could thank Dishnuoknya for the borrowed fame, even though he looked a bit like a villain. He might look a little shady, but he was actually extremely kind. His gentle voice pleaded for her to trust him as he coughed awkwardly. His eyes, sharp as blades, revealed that after the apocalypse began, Risa's father had contacted him. The city had declared the disaster a virus leak crisis to the outside world, giving the Wei Lam Corporation full authority to handle it. Wei Lam then proceeded to lock down and quarantine the entire city, forcing everyone into desperate breakout situations like the one they just faced. He felt his own abilities were limited, so he bowed his head and begged Luo Fu and Dishnuoknya to help him escort Risa to the extraction point safely. Luo Fu was moved and quietly whispered into Dishnuoknya's ear. He wanted to ask her to form a party with them, but with her typical cold and defiant nature, she immediately refused without a second's thought. She flatly rejected the idea, silently thinking that worrying about him wasn't enough, and now they were dragging along two pieces of dead weight. What a headache. Hearing her harsh words, the guy suddenly exploded with rage, growling aggressively and lunging forward. But not even a second later, he reverted to his initial goofy state, leaving everyone utterly speechless. After a while, they were all settled in the car, speeding through the night thanks to his insane driving skills. He successfully broke through the tight formations of mutated monsters that were swarming the road in waves. They flashed forward like an arrow, but just as someone was about to praise the car, it started acting up, swerving back and forth. It zigzagged down the road like a drunkard, smoke billowing everywhere, making everyone feel sick to their stomachs. The rickety car staggered on for a moment before the engine died completely, the tire bursting with a loud bang as smoke billowed out chaotically. The guy hadn't expected this outcome and sheepishly scratched his head as Dishtuknya cautiously circled the vehicle. While inspecting it, she spotted a sharp spike sticking out from underneath, making her suspect this wasn't an accident. It seemed like the whole thing was intentionally caused by someone. A quiet footstep approached, and Dishtuknya flinched. Quick as a flash, she aimed her gun with lightning speed, but unfortunately their enemies were one step ahead. They already had a gun pressed to a trembling Risa inside the car, arrogantly ordering Dishtuknya to drop her weapon. She couldn't believe she had actually fallen into their trap. Those scoundrels with their strange masks appeared on their faces as they swaggered forward, brutally ordering everyone out of the car. Then, with extreme caution, they began to search everyone, patting them down to see if Lakfu's group was hiding any weapons. Duknya's alluring figure and ice-cold aura quickly caught the attention of their leader, who gulped audibly, only to crudely grope her all over as his master's vision blurred through their unending connection, unable to hold back. Unable to restrain himself, he let out a continuous roar, only to be met with a physical blow from the man that sent his head spinning. He collapsed to the ground in agony as the leader with a crazed and arrogant look ground his teeth and pointed straight at him. The dark barrel of a gun was aimed at his head, meeting Lakfu's hateful gaze with a taunting look, wanting to test if he could use it to shut him up for good, but echoing through the silent night, Risa's terrified scream shattered everything. It shattered the moment, causing the leader to slightly loosen his grip and turn his attention towards her panicked and anxious face. Her expression, along with her jade-green eyes, sparked his interest in this pretty foreign girl. He immediately moved toward her and grabbed her violently, making Risa cry out in fear, which caused Kook's face to turn purple with rage. His bearded face began to contort as he let out a series of chaotic growls, completely losing his composure. Seeing his young mistress being so brutally assaulted, he was on the verge of losing control, but he was completely immobilized. A dark gun barrel was pressed firmly against the back of his neck, while Duknya, drenched in a cold sweat, had a chilling realization. She realized that even if she used her power, there was no way to instantly control all of them. At her feet lay Luo, his mind in turmoil, endlessly blaming himself for being too weak. He couldn't protect those around him as that despicable man dragged Risa towards a patch of overgrown weeds nearby. Ignoring her desperate pleas, he violently shoved her to the ground, his wicked hands immediately continuing their assault. He shamelessly forced her legs apart, but just as he was about to pounce, Risa let out a sharp scream and then froze in utter shock. She was stunned to see a spray of blood from in front of her splash directly onto her horrified face, and the atmosphere instantly changed. The air turned bizarre and unsettling, leaving her with no strength left to struggle as his underlings waited impatiently. When their boss didn't return after a while, they grew restless and paced back and forth, just as the very space around them seemed to freeze. It solidified, hardened by a sinister aura that was bubbling up everywhere, spreading terror through the darkness. In the desolate silence, an unnatural power began to stir, causing Lakfu's entire body to tense up in high alert. He suddenly wondered if the reason the monsters hadn't pursued them here was because there was currently something else present, a more terrifying existence. Perhaps? One of the henchmen, his patience worn thin, cautiously approached the bushes. Waiting for him inside was a bloodthirsty monster with sharp, mirror-like fangs that were constantly emitting waves of killing intent. Its entire body lay hidden within the eerie ground, waiting for prey. And upon seeing the man, it immediately lunged. It shot forward with a terrifying ferocity toward the group, startling them into opening fire with a relentless barrage. But tragically, the bullets had no effect as the monster rampaged with its terrifying tentacles, devastating the landscape. It tore through its surroundings with ease, sending rocks and debris flying everywhere as if a terrifying earthquake had just struck. Facing that tyrannical rage, Cook cautiously advanced, firing his gun non-stop. His eyes filled with deep resentment. He screamed with utter hatred, demanding that the monster return Risa to him. But against its terrifying power and overwhelming strength, the colossal beast's overwhelming power sent him flying with a single, devastating blow. His blood stained the dusty ground, mingling with the swirling smoke in a tragic scene as Dishtuknya rushed forward to intercept the attack. She tried to block the terrifying power of the beast as it rampaged, destroying everything in its path, her tears showing no sign of stopping. But having fought non-stop for an entire day, her stamina was completely depleted and sweat-drenched. Her flushed, trembling face The beast sneered cruelly before brutally seizing her in its grasp. Her entire body felt like it was being crushed to pieces as blood gushed from her mouth and nose, leaving her trembling violently in excruciating pain. Unending agony. Luo Fu turned pale with terror, completely helpless. Was he really just going to stand by and watch Duknya get slaughtered in an instant? His mind went blank, his body frozen completely, unable to think of a strategy. Not anymore. At the critical moment, the vile beast opened its maw to devour her whole. Luo Fu mustered every last shred of his life force and remaining strength into a deafening roar. He threw his head back, channeling an immense power born from the depths of his own hatred. Without a moment's hesitation, he unleashed that torrent of spiritual energy directly into the beast's body, his eyes blazing with the fire of pure vengeance. The very heavens seemed to tremble before his overwhelming attack, which exploded through the air in searing waves of energy. It was an unbelievable power, as if the world itself was roaring in outrage for Luo Fu's anguish. The colossal monster, faced with this terrifying torrent of latent power, an awakening born from the depths of Luo Fu's hatred and sorrow, was instantly overwhelmed, but the backlash left his body frozen once more, and he could only watch from afar, calling her name in hopeless anguish. But no matter how desperately Luo Fu screamed, Duknya was already like a lifeless doll, cold and drenched in a sea of her own blood, motionless and unresponsive. Luo Fu used the last of his strength to crawl towards her, his battered and bruised hands reaching out. After a desperate struggle, he finally managed to touch the back of Duknya's chillingly cold hand. And then everything went black. After some time, waking from a cold darkness, Luo Fu slowly pried his eyes open. The first thing he saw was the blinding glare of an electric light, causing Luo Fu's weak pupils to struggle, to adjust. Filled with utter confusion, he instinctively recoiled into the corner of the bed, completely unable to comprehend where he was. As if answering his unspoken questions, Risa suddenly burst through the door. Seeing that he was awake, she was overcome with joy and rushed forward to embrace Luo Fu, catching him completely by surprise. Before he could process it, he noticed Quiet was also there, his broken arm set in a splint. He offered a faint, weary smile, making Luo Fu's head throb. What in the world is going on? He still couldn't remember anything. Risa explained that during the chaos of that night she had hidden under a car and miraculously survived. She witnessed the moment that wretched, bullet-headed guy was taken out. In that dangerous situation, she trembled and wept silently at the sheer brutality of the beast, and then she saw the moment Luo Fu and Duknya were rescued from a pool of blood by two henchmen. Hearing this, he let out a sigh of relief, but then Luo Fu suddenly remembered Duknya and shot up in a panic. His eyes were wide with terror, his body tense, desperate to know where she was. Following Risa's directions, Fu finally found her, but she remained completely unconscious even as he called her name until his voice was raw. Fu guessed she must have suffered from severe mana exhaustion, so he gently waved his hand, conjuring a stream of aura to test his theory. His stream of aura gently flowed into Duknya, wrapping around her, but she did not stir in the slightest. It seemed she needed much more. After exerting himself for a while, Fu, now covered in a light sweat, came to a realization. He figured he needed to go out and hunt monsters to absorb their energy. However, the thought of leaving the injured Duknya alone made him extremely uneasy. Suddenly, the minion who had saved him yesterday appeared from the kitchen, sparking a pretty solid plan in Fu's mind. Hearing that Fu wanted him to act as a lure, the minion was instantly stunned with surprise. But then he saw the intimidating aura and a simmering rage radiating from Fu, and he broke out in a cold sweat. In the midst of his hesitation, the female lackey casually pointed right at him and chimed in. She cheerfully announced that he used to be the lure all the time, and her flirtatious demeanor made him blush beet red. He found himself completely unable to refuse. Well, he might as well act like a man in front of the beautiful woman he admired. He suddenly regained his composure, his fighting spirit flaring as he agreed to cooperate with Fu, and they clasped hands to seal the deal. The entire city was now a desolate ruin, a dead city teeming with the grotesque figures of demonic monsters. Their numbers were constantly growing, and they shambled aimlessly through every street and alley. The minion tossed a rock at one of the monsters, then cunningly provoked it, causing it to roar furiously as it charged after him. After a long chase, he finally managed to lure it into the building where Fu had been waiting. The moment Fu saw it, a chilling demonic smile spread across his face, making the tense atmosphere feel absolutely terrifying. The air seemed to freeze, and the chaotic pile of corpses at his feet was clearly the result of a brutal and bloody battle. It made the monsters break out in a cold sweat. It seemed today was its last day, and indeed it was. Fu suddenly grabbed its leg from behind, causing it to fall before it could even react, and he immediately seized the opportunity. Quick as a flash, he unleashed a terrifyingly powerful torrent of aura that crashed down on it, delivering a fatal blow that left nothing intact. Sticky, black blood splattered all over the floor. That is enough hunting for today. Fu looked at the pile of monster corpses behind him with a sense of accomplishment. He felt that he was lucky to have their cooperation. He probably could not have done it alone. It had now been 2 days since the apocalypse began. It all started when a giant jellyfish-like monster appeared at the school. An unidentified object was released, triggering a mutation outbreak that led to the city being completely overrun. Since then, Fu suddenly awakened a miraculous ability, and Duknya was also prompted to gain a power related to skeletons. The two of them were forced to flee for their lives. Afterward, he learned from Duknya and her parents about the Ui Lam Corporation. This corporation had saved him during an unnamed incident 3 years ago and had been secretly sending people to protect him in relation to this crisis. Fu wondered just how much they knew about his abilities, the truth behind the organization, and the identity of his biological parents. What were they hiding? And after that, whilst on the perilous journey to the Ui Lam headquarters. In a dangerous and terrifying situation, he and Yedeya formed a party with Cod and Risa retreating together to a safe zone. Unfortunately, they ran into some thugs and alerted a giant mutated monster, nearly getting the whole party wiped out. If it weren't for this special ability, a loser like him would have died over 100,000 times on this apocalyptic day. Today's combat yielded a lot of useful information. First, Luo Fu can absorb energy from the monsters. However, it's restricted to kills made using his ability. Conventional methods like guns don't work. Second, the ability seems to only affect mutated creatures and has no effect on ordinary humans. Third, the power he expends is recovered after the target is defeated, along with the additional energy gained from the monster kill. The more he fights, the more power he gains. Luo Fu's current absorption limit is 30 creatures. Fourth, these monsters won't initiate combat. They will only attack if he displays clear killing intent towards them. After gaining this experience and drawing these conclusions, Luo Fu is eager to conduct even bolder experiments next time. After that intense battle, he gently transferred streams of energy into Yedeya's body. She was still completely unconscious, likely because she had exhausted too much energy from transforming and fighting so much earlier. It made him wonder just how much energy he needed to replenish for her to be okay. Suddenly, Yedeya's eyes fluttered open. She looked dazed, which made Luo Fu incredibly happy, even though he had exhausted his own strength for her, leaving his face pale and drained. But as long as she was awake, he was content. She stretched and let out a long yawn. Then suddenly she saw him. Seeing that disciple of hers made her lose her cool. Remembering yesterday's events, her temper flared and she immediately lashed out. She landed a kick so hard it drew blood, and before he could even explain, Luo Fu rushed in to stop her. He told her to stop explaining that they were now in a cooperative relationship, and that without him, he couldn't have saved her. The hot-headed Yedeya almost finished him for good. Luo Fu broke into a cold sweat watching them bicker back and forth. He had no idea what kind of face he was supposed to make at that very moment. In a secret base somewhere, a mysterious woman was at work. She was deploying her squads and personnel into strategic combat positions while also organizing another team. She was preparing a team to approach Luo Fu, the rumored specimen of the primordial seed. She licked her lips with a seductive allure, guessing that he must have awakened his powers by now, her words dripping with malicious intent. Back at the school, disgusting, squirming monsters covered every surface, forming a terrifying horde. Bloodthirsty ghouls gathered in swarms, turning the school into a haunted ruin that reeked of the Grim Reaper's breath. Suddenly, a tank crashed down from above, charging forward without hesitation and shattering the tense atmosphere. From inside emerged the fully armed Alpha Squad 5 of the Weyland Corporation, acting on direct orders. They were under orders from the female doctor to find the whereabouts of Luo Fu, specimen number 1. The monsters had already infested the entire school, making the search anything but easy. Yet this was the source of the last signal. It was the final signal that Special Agent Yedeya had transmitted. The squad leader worried that using explosives might injure Luo Fu. He spoke in a low voice, immediately commanding his subordinates to enter the fallen zone, which had been overrun by a horde of aggressive monsters, and assess the situation. That night, a large vehicle carrying Lak Fu's group sped down the pitch-black road. Suddenly, their path was blocked by a massive pileup of large vehicles that had apparently gotten stuck on their way to the extraction point. The wreckage formed a chaotic heap of scrap metal, leaving them no choice but to get out and proceed on foot. Then, out of nowhere, a grotesque horde of monsters appeared, howling as they advanced into the headlights. Without a word, Dishtuk Nya stepped out of the vehicle, ignoring Lak Fu's offer to help and insisting on handling the threat alone. Her cold words pierced him like a blade, making him realize that even now, Dishtuk Nya still didn't believe he could defeat them. Infuriated, Lak Fu stepped forward, a brilliant aura of energy gathering in his hand. He wanted her to see clearly that he was no longer the failure he once was. With a glint of bold confidence in his eyes, Lak Fu drew back his fist and aimed a cunning strike at the monster before him. He decisively unleashed what looked like a ferocious blow, full of raw power, but it turned out to be all for show. The attack fizzled out pathetically like a candle in the wind, much to his own bewilderment. Dik Duknya just stared in utter disbelief at the fool in front of her. Oh, crap. He suddenly remembered he had transferred all of his abilities to Dik Duknya. A chill ran down his spine as he realized his power level was back at 0%, nothing more and nothing less. I'm so screwed. Lak Fu immediately turned tail and ran for his life, screaming for her to save him. Risa and the others couldn't help but laugh at his antics. What a comedian. Dik Duknya stepped forward, her sword ablur as more and more demons swarmed the area, turning the scene into a chaotic melee. While fighting, she yelled for everyone to make a run for it immediately. Everyone scrambled like a disturbed beehive, their panicked retreat alerting the nearby squad, who instantly raised their guns. Realizing they were just civilians, the soldiers lowered their aim and instead guided them toward the safe zone. They then unleashed a merciless rain of bullets on the pursuing demons, dropping them dead on the spot. Lak Fu, panting heavily alongside Risa's group, hurried toward the large crowd waiting to be processed. Amidst the constant noisy chatter, the group breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had finally made it through that ordeal, and were so ecstatic they could scream. He then overheard Risa ask if he would be going home later, a sensitive question that stirred up painful memories. It made him hesitate, unsure how to answer her. Suddenly, hushed whispers from another direction drew everyone's attention. A small girl with long hair completely obscuring her face was squatting on the ground, trembling pitifully. The sight tugged at the heartstrings of a few onlookers who paused to see if she needed help. She slowly lifted her head, revealing a pair of horrifyingly large, pure white pupils that stared unblinkingly at them. A murky, dark red ichor oozed from the sharp, cracked faces characteristic of the demonic horde. They lunged forward to viciously maul the old man in front of them, successfully turning the scene into a living nightmare. It became a chaotic mess of blood and gore that splattered everywhere, alarming everyone, including Fu Do, who realized that if this wasn't handled immediately, everyone here would contract the infectious virus and face a terrible fate. That gruesome scene was merely the opening shot for a chain of horrific events about to unfold. It threw all the civilians present into a panic as they screamed and chaotically trampled one another in a desperate stampede. With a deafening bang, a mysterious blonde-haired man revealed his marksmanship skills powerfully yet methodically. He continuously shot down the monsters one by one, as each muzzle flash was followed by a fresh torrent of blood gushing onto the ground. The overpowering metallic stench of blood filled the air, making the atmosphere more grotesque than ever. The first mutated woman was shot dead, causing her husband to reel from the shock, his face turning pale and numb. Seeing the soldier let his guard down, he swiftly snatched the man's gun and shot him in the head without a moment's hesitation. The horrific sound and tragic sight unfolded once more before they could intervene, leaving Lak Fu's group unable to bear the scene. A hair-raising chill ran down their spines, a suffocating feeling tightening in their chests, but the military squad remained unfazed. They continued herding the civilians forward, then ordered the unit wearing Kana armbands to clean up the scene. They cleared the tragic area as if nothing had happened, swiftly carrying away each heavy, blood-soaked corpse. During the screening process, they found a man showing signs of mutation and coldly led him away. Despite his shocked protests, less than a second later, grotesque clusters of sharp spikes erupted from his mouth. And so the bloody process of elimination continued to repeat itself. Seeing the blood-soaked stretcher wasn't taken away sent a chill down Lak Fu's spine as he remembered back at the school infection had always been immediate. This new development was baffling. He couldn't understand why people were now showing signs of an incubation period. Finally, it was time for Lak Fu's group to be screened for the infection, including the two guys, Doi Dia and Visa. Both of them, as well as Lak Fu, were cleared safely, so he anxiously watched Dien Duc Nha, hoping she would pass too. But his hopes were dashed when the doctor, trembling in fear, announced that both she and Kwok had a problem. The words struck like a thunderclap, and the guards immediately swarmed them, surrounding the pair aggressively. Kwok protested, claiming he only had a broken bone, so they decided to inspect his wound to confirm. What met their eyes were purplish veins bulging from the pale flesh, and according to the doctor, Kwok was infected. The infection, however, appeared to be in a dormant state, which left Luo Fu bewildered as he began to suspect something. He suspected this very strain was the source of humanity's mutation, and as for Dien Duc Nha, she was also infected. The fact she had the same strain startled Luo Fu, who couldn't help but wonder if she had been infected by his own unique ability. The doctor then made the decision to take them both to a medical ward for quarantine and observation. Hearing this, the crowd immediately erupted in fear that the two would drag them all to their deaths and aggressively surged forward, wanting to drive the pair out. Their selfish nature surfaced as they refused to be in the same place as monsters, and the power of the mob grew increasingly fierce like a protest as a sea of people rushed forward, overwhelming even the defense guards with every word a vicious threat demanding the two get lost immediately. The enraged mob continued its hostile roar, proposing that the two be cast out immediately, which created a violent commotion, forcing Khan to step forward and agree to leave. After speaking, he told Jia in a low voice to go on ahead and not worry about him, but Luo Fu gently approached to persuade him to stay. The jeers of the crowd outside still echoed in his ears, making him uncontrollably furious and unable to take it anymore. Burning with rage, he charged outside, screaming wildly. It was then that Dish Duc Nha finally spoke up. She announced that she was from Squad 7 of the Wei Lam Guard and requested to see the leader of the defense guards stationed here, which left them momentarily flustered and surprised. The sea of people below assumed Luo Fu's group was again trying to cover for each other and grew immensely furious. Envy and hatred flared up as they began a deafening chant to drive them away. The uproar was incredibly chaotic. A tense confrontation between the civilians and the savior soldiers erupted into a flurry of constant shoving. The scene devolved into an utterly chaotic, noisy, and frenzied pandemonium. Suddenly, the captain of the guard of Wei Lam, the talented marksman from before Lannan, suddenly appeared. Hearing the public's dissatisfaction with accepting and helping the infected through medical quarantine, he let out a slight laugh and began to persuade the people, begging them all to trust. In his squad, he promised that the moment an infected person mutates, they would be executed immediately without mercy. But that group of people remained as furious as ever. They did not want to waste resources on those infected individuals. In their anger, their words began to touch upon the Wei Lam Corporation, prompting Lannan to speak up, stating that the city of Zet had granted Wei Lam full authority to handle this crisis and that they were using all of their greatest efforts to ensure the safety of every single person. However, researching and developing a cure still required a large number of cases for study. He claimed their medical collective was the best in the world. Therefore, their belief that this crisis would pass very quickly was always their top priority. That enraged mob continued to surge forward, not trusting Lan Han in the slightest. Their attitude remained extremely stubborn, aggressive, and belligerent, causing him to say nothing and just offer a slight smirk. Suddenly, he pointed down towards Kop, making the man sweat with fear. Seeing this, Dish Duc Nha immediately aimed fiercely down at Lannan, surprising the surrounding soldiers just as much. And just like that, several more dark gun barrels were aimed at her. Then, suddenly, at that very moment, Kop's injured arm abruptly swelled up. It puffed up bizarrely. Just as Lannan had predicted, he stated that even with an RLEH infection, the state also changes because of the person. Even if the host is threatened with death like right now, there will be no mutation, because this is a latent type infected. This is completely different from a normal infected person who, even if not yet mutated in the initial stages, would have their mutation triggered when threatened with death. As he said this, a person's body suddenly, the loudmouthed man from the crowd suddenly went through a grotesque transformation, splitting in two as his guts spilled out before the horrified onlooker. In that instant, a volley of bullets from Lannan's position shot out with lightning speed, as if this shocking turn of events had been anticipated. Having witnessed the grim reality firsthand, the crowd could only clamp their mouths shut in silence with no further objections. Risa, seeing how Kusa's arm had transformed, began to cry hysterically. Before entering the special zone, Kus glanced back, entrusting Risa's care to Luo Fu before he could continue with a heavy heart. A strange man approached Duknya, informing her that his superior La Nan had summoned her. Luo Fu watched her being led away, his heart filled with an unbearable anxiety as his gaze followed her intently. Only Luo Fu and Risa, along with 2 guards, were safely transported to the designated safe zone. Night had completely fallen, with hazy mists blanketing the area, creating a silent and eerily ominous atmosphere. Seeing that Risa was too worried to sleep, he gently patted her head to reassure her, promising that tomorrow they would visit the quarantine zone together to see their 2 friends. Only then did her heart settle and she quietly closed her eyes. Luo Fu gently turned off the light and headed to his room, but the sound of a heated argument suddenly echoed from a dark corner. The commotion in the dead of night made him turn his head, curious about what new plot point was unfolding. A group of people was arguing incessantly with the doctor, and Luo Fu, hiding behind a wall, overheard some critical information. He was stunned to hear that everyone in the quarantine zone had been taken away. His eyes widened in alarm, realizing the gravity of this plot twist. This is bad. The situation feels incredibly off. I have to find Kus and Duknya now. Deciding his course of action, Luo Fu immediately sprinted toward the restricted zone, his expression more frantic than ever. It looked like this was going to be a long and harrowing night for the protagonist. Just as our hero reached the gate, he was blocked by a guard with an extremely aggressive demeanor. He broke out in a cold sweat. Was his desperate rescue mission going to fail right here? Fortunately, Luo Fu used his quick wits to fabricate a story. He claimed that a large horde of infected had appeared in the residential area, acting with extreme urgency, as if he needed to report this emergency to the commander. This dire news made the guard's eyes widen in panic, sweat pouring down as he trembled and immediately raised his walkie-talkie. He called to report it to his comrades, but unfortunately for him, by the time he realized he had been completely duped, Luo Fu had already seized the moment and vanished inside, leaving the guard utterly bewildered and confused. The protagonist then used every ounce of his strength to sprint desperately inside. A large helicopter sat imposingly on the rooftop helipad, leading Luo Fu to a chilling suspicion. He suspected this was the very vehicle used to transport the infected away. He shot inside like an arrow. He burst inside, startling the staff present, his frantic expression showing his desperate search for the familiar faces of his 2 friends, ignoring the medical staff who were trying to restrain him. Luo Fu scanned the area for a long time, but saw no sign of them. Instead, lying on scattered gurneys, were horrifically mutated corpses lined up in long rows. In a moment of distraction, the cold barrel of a gun was suddenly pressed tightly against his temple. Luo Fu lowered his gaze and slowly raised his hands, signaling his surrender in this classic cliffhanger moment. Surrender. Then he suddenly lunged forward, his own destructive aura flaring up with a brilliant, blazing light. It surged violently, his mind going berserk as if he wanted to flatten this entire place into a wasteland with sheer aggression. His ferocious and battle-hungry appearance caught the other group completely off guard, and Huyan Ao immediately screamed out. He was terrified that he would actually make the place explode into smithereens. After waiting for a long while, besides the blinding light he emitted and the billowing smoke, nothing else happened. It turned out that Fu had used that moment of chaotic commotion to disappear, leaving the group utterly furious. Following the others inside, Fu searched and searched, but still couldn't find Ket or Duknya anywhere, making him extremely anxious. He felt that this place was truly bizarre. Helicopters flew in and out all night, yet they only transported the infected. Did the lives of ordinary families not matter? Suddenly, a cunning glint flashed in his eyes. Fu had just sensed what seemed to be a murderous aura lingering, enveloping the entire atmosphere. He was sure the person he sensed was Duknya, who was upstairs and had already undergone a mutation. La Nan heard the guards shouting in a panic about an intruder, so he clutched his swollen face and miserably dragged himself out the door to explain. He said he had invited him over for tea, so there was no need for such a loud alarm. He coughed for a moment, his face already swollen like a pig's head, and returned to his room. Inside, Luo Fu and Duknya had been waiting for a while. He scratched his head, finally understanding everything. It was just a misunderstanding that had driven La Nan absolutely mad earlier. He simply wanted to see if Duknya could control the infection, but instead he ended up taking a devastating blow like this. He and Duknya had known each other since childhood, having been in the same class at the Yai Lam Guard youth training camp back then. Yet Duknya couldn't remember anything other than the fact that besides ambushing people, his other achievements were all top-notch, which made La Nan's face darken. She felt she might have been a bit too ruthless. It was all because he had dared to point a gun straight at her earlier, which made it fundamentally impossible for Duc Nha to control her emotions. And just like that, La Non instantly possessed a miserably swollen face, looking utterly pathetic. He let out a long sigh. The moment he heard her say that their group planned to go to the Yui Lam headquarters, he immediately started trembling. His face instantly turned a cryptic pale green, and cold sweat trickled down his neck as he began to speak. He warned the two that if the infected go to the headquarters, they will all be treated as specimens for research. Every word out of his mouth was like a thud, leaving Luo Fu and Duc Nha completely stunned with their jaws dropped. He realized that was why those helicopters were transporting the infected but not evacuating ordinary civilians. It was truly unbelievable. La Non clutched his face in despair, explaining that it was an order from the higher-ups. He then let out a tragic scream, his face dazed with fury, realizing those people had already given up on this city. The truth was the publicly announced quarantine line basically didn't exist in reality. Because of supply shortages and heavy casualties, the real safe zone was actually centered on the retreat point with a perimeter of just 1 kilometer. Luo Fu and Duc Nha were utterly dumbfounded, unable to believe this reality and not understanding how the awakening could be so terrible. La Non explained that their group lacked an organized rescue force and could only release the coordinates of the retreat point, hoping to attract the public to evacuate on their own accord. And then they would screen everyone, bringing those with latent infections to headquarters. Hearing this, Luo Fu briefly wondered why they didn't publicly disclose the true situation to allow international relief organizations to intervene. But La Non quickly waved his hand. He sneered continuously, explaining that if this got out, everyone would know how Ilam was handling things, and it wouldn't be to their. If that happened, the company's stock price would tank, and his superiors would have his head. Luo Fu growled in a low voice, asserting that if he had the power to change the current situation. Would La Non still obey such foolish orders? Seeing the intense look in his eyes, Luo Fu seemed to get a shot of adrenaline and became incredibly fired up. He charged forward, aggressively shouting his desire to go to the quarantine zones and save the infected, then immediately begin a full evacuation. La Non was completely stunned, hearing every word. The current situation was truly a tough call to make. Even though he had just been named an outstanding employee of Yuilam, this corporation was proving to be completely inhumane. He then bit his trembling hand, hesitating and thinking hard for a long moment before quietly making his final decision. The door to the room flew open, and the three of them emerged one by one, much to the confused dismay of the surrounding guards. From down the hallway, chaotic howls and screams echoed everywhere, becoming deafeningly loud. The noise came from the latently infected who were transforming into a frenzied state, creating a terrifyingly chaotic cacophony. Just then, a doctor reported that the infected foreigner in room number 17 had gone into a berserk frenzy, which made Luo Fu instantly realize the person mentioned was none other than Kwok. Without another moment of hesitation, he and Duc Nha dashed over to check on the situation. Kwok had now mutated into a grotesque and bizarre form. His entire body was covered in bulging red and blue veins, and his mind had descended into madness, as he ceaselessly growled and roared in the pitch-black room. The moment he glimpsed a figure, he lunged like a ferocious beast, charging with lightning speed, his entire body surging with immense power. Fortunately, Duc Nha managed to block the violent charge just in time. Luo Fu was filled with agony at the tragic sight of Kwok. He trembled as he approached, trying to gently coax him to snap out of it. He softly mentioned Visa, causing Kwok to freeze instantly. On his veiny and anguished face, a flicker of a distant memory seemed to appear. This made him stumble, as he fought an internal battle against the waves of madness threatening to burst forth. Luo Fu gritted his teeth and began to unleash streams of brilliant aura. He had lost his parents once before, and he was determined not to let such a tragedy happen ever again. With that thought, he aimed the brilliant streams of power toward the howling Kwok. Before the astonished eyes of everyone around him, he used all his might to begin channeling his energy. Streams of light enveloped and permeated Kwok's body, accompanied by sharp pangs of pain and Luo Fu's tumultuous shouts calling out to him. Dense, roaring streams of brilliantly shining aura were transferred into Kwok's body. Amidst Luo Fu's powerful surge, Kwok immediately reverted to his original form, drenched in sweat, A look of utter bewilderment and anxiety washed over his face as he processed what he had just been through surrounded by the crowd. They were stunned and unable to believe their eyes that he had actually recovered. In a state of pure astonishment, they couldn't even close their mouths. The man trembled as he softly voiced his thanks to Luo Fu, then looked all over his now healed body. He was half believing and half doubting it, unsure if this was reality or a dream. His body hadn't fully recovered yet, and there was a slight, lingering exhaustion and pain. After a quick scan, a system notification announced that the patient's body was completely cured, making Luo Fu ecstatic. He let out a joyous shout. Everyone immediately erupted into a buzz, unable to believe the scene before them. This was truly a miracle. A miracle indeed. Luo Fu, getting more pumped up, then quietly called for Lanan to quickly lead him to the other people suffering from the infectious disease. Powerful streams of his aura were channeled into the bodies of the poor victims, who were struggling against each violent flare-up of the illness. Although deploying his aura so rapidly was costing Luo Fu a considerable amount of stamina and causing extreme fatigue, he felt that as long as he could save just one more person, it would all be worth it. He was happy. He didn't want anyone else to experience the same suffering he had witnessed, and so Luo Fu just poured all his strength into channeling powerful waves of spiritual energy into the bodies of those who shared the same fate. His heart was filled with a desperate prayer that they would soon awaken completely whole. Kwok's group quietly observed him from afar, a smile spreading across their faces as they realized that the current Luo Fu was truly reliable and useful. They then overheard Lanyan expressing some jealousy over how Ditchduk Nya could so easily use his bloodline's power to transform without any repercussions. She fell silent for a moment before challenging him in a stern voice. Just try coming back to life from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Then the rest of them break out in a cold sweat, goosebumps crawling up their skin. Just what kind of horrific things had she been through? Meanwhile, Luo Fu tirelessly exerted himself, healing one person after another with his seemingly boundless aura. His body was weary and exhausted from the effort, yet he never stopped, not even hesitating for a single moment. It was because his sheer willpower and his determination to create a peaceful world were guiding his every move. And so in the end, when all the patients had finally been cured, it was at that very moment that Luo Fu, having completely exhausted his strength, collapsed motionless onto a bed. He was utterly spent after a busy night of channeling his full power without a single moment of rest. Suddenly, the people nearby noticed the arrival of Kwok and Ditchduk Nya in the ward and immediately began to shout, aggressively trying to drive the two of them out for fear of being infected. Kwok calmly held up a medical test report. In front of the hostile crowd, he announced that both of them were no longer a contagion risk and had also been released from quarantine. The crowd immediately began to whisper amongst themselves. Then they heard him mention that their own family members who were infected were also showing signs of great improvement. They all rushed off in a wave of unstoppable excited energy to see for themselves. At last, it was quiet again. However, this peace didn't last for even a moment as Kwok suddenly broke into a violent dry coughing fit. To everyone's worried and stunned expressions, his shoulders trembled painfully as he coughed violently, unable to even lift his head. The world before his eyes grew blurry and dim. Overcome with pain and fear, he stared at the streaks of fresh, dark blood coming from his throat. A wave of extreme anxiety and panic rose in his throat, not understanding what was happening as he clutched his weary face in agony. He was exhausted from reverting to his transformation state once more, his limbs trembling and his heart filled with immense sorrow and regret as the sentence of death called his name again. He was supposed to be completely cured, so why had things come to this? The chaotic and noisy scene unfolding before him roused a dazed Luo Fu, who sat up to see Risa's group causing a commotion. He was utterly confused as Risa anxiously urged him to come quickly and check on Kwok's condition. At that moment he was in excruciating pain, hunched over beside the bed in a state of deep depression and weary despair as he gritted his teeth. Luo Fu rushed forward, placing a hand on him and channeling a gentle stream of spiritual energy. Feeling a slight discomfort he couldn't comprehend, he had clearly eradicated it completely, so why were they back at square one like this? Just then, the doctor from the next room rushed over to Luo Fu, hastily informing him that the other patient was exhibiting the exact same symptoms. Luo Fu's face turned pale as he observed for a long moment. Finally, on the doctor's advice, they had no choice but to first move them to the quarantine zone, and then they would. Explain everything later, Kook was quickly moved to a gurney and given an oxygen tube in an attempt to hang on to what little strength he had left. The doctor explained that when the cellular structure of the respiratory system suffers damage and failure, it leads to a cascade of issues. Kook's current symptoms were quite similar to those of the infected patient treated yesterday. This meant the re-germ was still alive. Though weakened once it bonded with the host's respiratory system, it would cause medical equipment. To mistakenly identify it as a natural part of the body, Luo Fu grew increasingly dizzy as he realized that the first time. The pathogen resisted eradication by changing its infection site, leading to 3 mutations. This time, in a desperate bid for survival, it had merged with the human body, causing Kook to suffer collateral damage. However, he still couldn't understand why Yi Danya alone remained unharmed. Could it be because of her special constitution? Luo Fu's face went completely pale, sweat beading on his brow as he painfully realized he had failed once more. The irony was crushing, hearing the doctor report that he had already helped Kook by transfusing new plasma and white protein into his body, and that his condition was temporarily stable, but further treatment would have to be done at headquarters. Risa was overjoyed and hastily bowed in thanks, seeing Luo Fu trembling with a grim expression. As he began to apologize, Idenya quickly interjected to reassure him. It was all because their understanding of this Zelaya strain was far too limited. After all, it had only been 72 hours since the apocalypse began. Even the top scientists at headquarters couldn't possibly have researched and created a cure by now. In a low, pensive voice, she noted that for any living organism to continue its survival, it must reproduce and evolve, and this Zelaya strain was no exception. They had simply been too naive in their thinking. His face paled as he looked over at her. If what she said was true, then this pathogen wouldn't just stop. It would continue to evolve, again and again, perhaps in a matter of days or even just a few short hours. He feared that by then, even the current human-based military forces would be hard-pressed to resist it. Suddenly, a strange, almost imperceptible sound rang out, instantly triggering Idena's defensive instincts. Quick as a flash, she shot out the door to assess the situation. In front of the doorway sat a pair of men's shoes soaked in fresh blood and looking utterly out of place in the sterile scene. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from the high, dark, and damp ceiling, thick streams of black blood began to trickle down, dripping hesitantly before, with a crash, she looked up to find a massive, grotesque beast with sharp fangs snarling chaotically right above her head as a deafening explosion erupted from its body. Blazing with terrifying power, Luo Fu was knocked off his feet by the shockwaves, stumbling amidst the billowing smoke. He immediately rushed out, trying to find Deep Duke Nya, but as he cracked the door open, the beast's massive and horrifying figure greeted him. It was waiting for him, forcing him to retreat in a flash and slam the door shut. Then he turned to everyone else present and told them to hide. Quickly and quietly, the monster then smashed straight into the room. Inside was an empty, silent space, causing it to hesitate. Then suddenly it spotted a trail of blood leading from the floor to the adjoining door. The scent of purification successfully caught its attention, and it began to crawl through just as planned. Luo Fu was already waiting for it in the next room, and the moment it appeared, he immediately swung his hand to unleash a dark sorcery skill right in its face. His eyes blazed with hatred, channeling every ounce of his powerful soul-crushing spiritual energy, aiming to kill it at all costs. After Luo Fu poured all his effort into channeling his energy, the monstrous beast was finally reduced to a puddle of purified gore, its shattered and tattered body collapsing onto the floor, and at that moment, Risa and the doctor cautiously crawled out from under the bed while Luo Fu, gasping for breath, realized something felt wrong. With such a huge commotion, the security team should have been here by now, and with that thought, he opened the door to check the situation, wanting to lend Deep Duke Nya a hand, as outside she was locked in a relentless battle against a horde of ferocious monsters that was growing larger by the second as the stench of dark blood mixed with swirling smoke. Making the situation increasingly dire, the beasts bared their sharp, spiky maws and charged at an incredible speed. Luo Fu quickly shouted a warning about the danger behind her. With a whoosh, a volley of their sharp spines shot towards her. Fortunately, Deep Duke Nya was agile enough to dodge to the side amidst the chaotic swarm of monsters. Hearing his offer to help, she coldly refused, telling him to stay put. This monster horde was not something he could handle. He felt a flash of irritation at being looked down on like that. In fact, he had just taken one down. but he knew that rushing in recklessly now would only serve as a distraction for her. Seeing Diepduknya's small frame fighting alone against the brutal demonic horde, her body already tattered and torn, made Luo Fu extremely anxious, and he wondered if there was another way he could help, perhaps a weapon like a sharp blade or a double-edged sword. Suddenly, Luo Fu thought of a plan. He realized that if her armor was formed by a special ability, then he could try using his own ability to reforge it. No sooner said than done. Luo Fu waved his hand, releasing streams of brilliant golden spiritual energy that enveloped his body. He then dashed towards Diepduknya, shooting the energy directly into her at an incredible speed. She was momentarily stunned by the immense power she received from him, then suddenly from behind another wave of monsters rushed in. She was surprised by the staggering power she received from him, then suddenly from behind a horde of monsters swarmed towards her. She immediately swung her hand to test the durability of the supernatural energy he had just bestowed upon her, instantly obliterating the horde of them. They shattered into tiny fragments amidst a spray of foul, pitch-black blood as her hands, thanks to the power that Fu transferred, had become razor-sharp weapons that shredded the monsters in an instant, leaving none of them standing. The filthy floor was covered in thick, sticky red gore at her feet. Seeing her surprise, he simply scratched his head and explained he was just running a small test. The results seemed pretty good. The two of them hurriedly led Risa's group and the injured on stretchers toward the outside, but the scene that awaited them was horrifying. The hallway was completely overrun with monsters, which left everyone stunned and speechless. The horde had already breached the evacuation point and was wreaking havoc everywhere. The floor was now littered with scattered food and mangled corpses, all mixed together, creating a tragic scene straight out of a horror movie. A guard, slumped in a corner, explained in his dying breath that monsters had burst out from inside, relentlessly slaughtering and infecting all the civilians who were gathered outside the room. Even the front lines had been ambushed by unknown creatures. Every single word made Luo Fu reel in utter disbelief. Upon learning that Lai Nian and the others had retreated to the helipad, Diepduknya decided everyone had to get there immediately. The evacuation point had fallen, and there was no other way to get back. At that very moment, the group of uninjured survivors was facing a grave danger from a horde of monsters. The beasts materialized out of thin air, blocking everyone's path. With a ferocious look, they charged forward, only to be intercepted by Luo Fu and Diepduknya, who appeared just in the nick of time to stop them, much to the utter astonishment of the people below.